Hello, I'm Jerry McKee, and I'm right here at Carnegie Library. They have gone over $2 million renovation here, and this is going to be a great ribbon cutting. So stay tuned and you will hear some great speeches about this wonderful library that's one of the oldest libraries, if not the oldest library in South Carolina. And you're really going to be really overwhelmed with all the wonderful things they got for you here at this library. I'm Jerry McKee, and you're with J&E Freelance Media Services.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. That's the first step in this process. Thank you everyone for being here. We truly appreciate it. This project has been a lot of work. It's been about 15 years in the making. Many people here have helped make this possible. And although it was a challenge, the product that we have here, we are immensely proud of. For those of you who may not know, this is the first Carnegie Library in South Carolina. It's one of 4 that is still operating. And we did a $2 million historic restoration and renovation to the facility. That project, all of the funding, is a result of the support of our South Carolina legislators, our local government officials, all of the donors, all of the friends and their fundraising efforts, and the support of organizations like the Timken Foundation. And we really couldn't do this without all of them backing us up. And I want to take a minute really, and if I could get a round of applause for all of the board members over the years that have made this project happen. This is very much their project and their hard work, and I'm happy that I was able to become a part of this when I came on board about 2.5 years ago, and I'm proud to be standing here today to say that we did it, that this happened. And while there are still, of course, a few things that need to be done, when are there not, but what we have here is a beautiful building, something that we can all celebrate, that represents all of us here in Union. And when you guys go in, you will get to be the first to see the traveling Smithsonian exhibit, Crossroads, Change in Rural America, which is made possible through the South Carolina Humanities. And this exhibit, it's on its national debut here and at 2 other locations in the country. So it's one of the first places in the country that you're able to see this exhibit. And so we're proud to be part of that as well. As part of the renovation, we restored the original part. When you look at these exterior colors and you see the greens and the reds and the whites and the blues, those are the original colors of the facility, and it's the same inside the historic parts. We also restored the original wood floors, so everything you're seeing is what this facility would have looked like in 1905. And that's yes, it's very cool. As many of you know, we renovated and expanded the facility in 1985, and that was the last major renovation to the facility. When they did that, they put in a basement, but it was a dirt floor with cinder block walls. And so those of you who have seen that basement, if you could call it a basement, will be surprised to see what we've done with that space. It's about 4,500 square feet, and it's been converted to spaces for teens and children. So we're very excited to be able to provide them with those spaces. Also, the space itself is themed after the Sumter National Forest, which is such a major component of Union County. And again, that was part of us making sure that Union is represented in this facility and that we are able to serve the members of the community. Another thing that you guys will notice is all the different rooms. We have study rooms, we have conference room, meeting room. The front space will be able to be used for events and exhibits. And we have offices to work with partners. So we will have SC Works as part of the facility, providing workforce development and training. We will have United Way's nonprofit agencies here providing services. We participate in the AmeriCorps program, which will provide financial stability navigation. And we will also be providing academic library services for USC Union. So that's just some of the partnerships that are in this facility. And we are proud to be able to work with those partners. And we look forward to everything that we can do in the future. And this facility is our launch pad for that. And you guys will notice in the coming months that there are many changes about the library. We are the Union County Library System. We now have those satellite locations throughout the county, and we appreciate the support of the municipalities and their mayors to make that possible and allow us to help serve their communities. We've updated our mission, and our mission now is that we serve as a cornerstone in Union, providing access to opportunities, activities, and services that improve the quality of life for all members of our community. And our vision is that we contribute to making Union County a joyful, welcoming, and thriving community. And we are proud to be able to do that with this facility. Thank you. All right, so I am going to introduce our keynote speaker for today. And after our keynote speaker, we will do the ceremonial ribbon cutting, and then everybody will be able to enter the facility through these historic doors, which have not been used in about 30 years. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Marjory Wentworth. Her poems have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize 6 times. Her books of poetry include Noticing Eden, Despite Gravity, The Endless Repetition of an Ordinary Miracle, and New and Selected Poems. She is the co-writer with Juan Mendez of Taking a Stand, The Evolution of Human Rights, co-editor with Kwame Dawes of Seeking, Poetry and Prose Inspired by the Art of Jonathan Green, and the author of the prize-winning children's story, Shackles. Her most recent collaborations include We Are Charleston, Tragedy and Triumph at Mother Emanuel with Herb Fraser and Dr. Bernard Powers, and the New York Times bestseller and winner of the 2018 Coretta Scott King Award, Out of Wonder, Poems Celebrating Poets with Kwame Alexander and Chris Colderly. Ms. Wentworth teaches at the Art Institute of Charleston and the College of Charleston. She is the poetry editor of Charleston Currents. Her work is included in the South Carolina Poetry Archives at Furman University, and she is the Poet Laureate of South Carolina. Marjory Wentworth.
Okay. Hi. Well, I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Just give me a second. Well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry it's so hot, but what are you going to do? I'm so honored to be here. I want to give a special thanks to Taylor Atkinson. There she is. Her whole family's up from Columbia. So she's been so busy, moving everything back in, and she asked me to come up, and she's been great to work with. And I want to reiterate the thanks for all the people and organizations and all of the hard work that brought us here today. So just congratulations. I mean, this is huge, and it's a huge honor. So I'm going to share a few poems because that's kind of my thing. But I want to begin by saying I love history, and I've really enjoyed learning about the history or how this library came to be. I read architect Robert Mill's description of the original Library Society here, and I think he's the man who designed the Washington Monument, right? So I read that about the Library Society, well-read, reasonably cultured, and successful folks, that's where they met, according to state historian D.D. Wallace, though this was before the Civil War. So there was a Library Society, which I believe was members only, but then came, Civil War and poverty and Reconstruction, but they kept their holdings, and it was still members only, but around 1898, the Union Library Association formed, and they allowed women in, which I guess was a big deal. And they still had 700 books left over, and they applied for their charter to the state, and their stated purpose was, and I love this, I think it speaks across the years, their stated purpose was to establish and maintain a library, to encourage sociability, here we are, good fellowship, and stimulate and foster a taste for literature. So I like that. Next, of course, as you know, the town applied to have a Carnegie library in 1903, which meant that a lot of people think that, oh, Carnegie just wrote a check and they got a library. Well, he did write a check, but funds had to be raised locally, just like you've all been doing now. over 100 years later. And I'm sure that the town's historical commitment to libraries really figured into the decision to build a Carnegie Library here, the oldest one in South Carolina. So now with this new revitalization, which includes the offices that were mentioned, which I think is brilliant. I've never heard of a library that opens up office space to nonprofits. We see this same commitment to community that I think characterizes this place. And I think of a library as a community center. They're open to everybody, rich or poor, old or young. Library programming is free, library cards and access to materials is free. And at a time when we're divided about a lot of things in our country, it seems that when it comes to the value of public libraries and passing referendums and raising money, we all agree. Everybody wants a good public library. It may be the only thing we agree on right now, but I don't know. We'll do a survey today, perhaps. So I don't think a lot of people don't realize all the services offered by libraries, besides just the traditional, lending out of books and DVDs. Libraries are places where people find jobs and help children prepare for school with free story hours. Knowledgeable librarians are invaluable resources with a wealth of knowledge, and I think of librarians as warriors for literacy and literature. I really admire the way libraries have kept pace with technology, providing computers to the public, particularly for those who don't have them or access to the internet. I was speaking in a library in Florence on a Sunday a couple of years ago, and the lines were out the door just to use the computers. And it really, they built that into their new library there. And I'm constantly amazed by what libraries do in terms of educational opportunities, and I think it's a huge undertaking and responsibility. I know this library obviously has exhibit space. Some libraries show films, meeting rooms for organizations. So as a poet laureate, I've partnered with libraries on a lot of events, from writing workshops, to readings, to the Big Read, you know about that, where the National Endowment funds a program where everybody in the town reads the book. It's all paid for, and the libraries hold events. We did that in Charleston. We brought Capital Book Fest to Charleston. And I've spoken at a lot of libraries recently honoring Cynthia Graham Hurd, who was a beloved librarian from Charleston, a librarian for 31 years. She was killed at Mother Emanuel in 2015. But her family started a literacy organization in her honor, and USC has started a scholarship for library studies in her name. And in the aftermath of the shooting, I was speaking at Nashville Public Library. Anybody here been to that library? It's, woo, it's quite something. And they have this program called Civil Rights in a Civil Society, and it's a program where the library works with the police and trains them in civil rights history in that community. And I brought that program to Charleston and with the Charleston County Police and the Charleston County Library System, and every recruit who comes in gets this training. Who would think you do police training with library, right? I mean, so I think that the possibilities are endless and flexible, and the possibilities and power of libraries to do good is seemingly endless to me. On a personal note, my mother-in-law was a librarian in a small town of 500. That's probably smaller than Union, right? And she would like find out a book that somebody wanted who lived too far or couldn't get to the library, and she would drive it to them. And what a community service. She finally retired. I think she was 85 or something. And I said, well, why did you step down? And she said, oh, I just thought it was time. So. All of our sons worked in libraries during high school. And after they graduated, they made a short public service announcement. They all went to film school. And they made this little public service announcement that was broadcast on TV to promote the bill to build new libraries in Charleston, and it passed overwhelmingly, and the Friends of the Library all said that they give my kids credit for that. So librarians and writers are members of the same tribe. I think every writer has a memory of the first experience in a library, and when I was a kid growing up in Massachusetts, we didn't have libraries in schools. How many of you had a library in school growing up? I mean, We did not. So the public or what do I call them now? Media centers? Media centers, right? So the highlight of my week was to go to the public library. And as you just stated, your kids' room is downstairs. The kids' room was downstairs, and my grandfather would bring me and just let me go, take as many books as I could carry, and I was really small, so, you know. And the freedom to just read whatever I wanted to. I still have my little library card, you know. And it was just a huge, huge part of my life. And then I can remember getting old enough to like fill my bike basket and be able to ride to the library. And just, you know, take out as many books as I wanted. So, you know, I think of libraries and librarians as people who particularly value poetry, which is not sort of something that you can even quantify in America. And since no institution does more to preserve and celebrate good writing than libraries, it's how I think librarians quietly save the world. You can quote me on that. So I'm going to read a poem, talk a little more, another poem, and then we'll get to the ribbon cutting. So one of my favorite poems about the sheer joy of reading library books is by Billy Collins, who's a very funny poet, very funny man. He was the U.S. Poet Laureate for a couple of years. And he wrote this poem called Marginalia. So that's what we write in the margins, right? So I'm going to share this poem with you. Marginalia. Sometimes the notes are ferocious skirmishes against the author raging along the borders of every page in tiny black script. If I could just get my hands on you, Kierkegaard, or Connor Cruise O'Brien, they seem to say, I would bolt the door and beat some logic into your head. Other comments are more offhand, dismissive, like, nonsense, please, ha, that kind of thing. I remember once looking up from my reading as my thumb is a bookmark, trying to imagine what the person must look like who wrote, "Don't be a ninny," alongside a paragraph in the life of Emily Dickinson. Students are more modest, needing to leave only their splayed footprints along the shore of the page. One scrawls metaphor next to a stanza of Eliot's. Another notes the presence of irony 50 times outside the paragraphs of a modest proposal. Or they are fans who cheer from the empty bleachers, hands cupped around their mouths. Absolutely, they shout to James Baldwin. Yes, bullseye, my man. Check marks, asterisks, and exclamation points rain down along the sidelines. And if you have managed to graduate from college without ever having written man versus nature in a margin, perhaps now is the time to take one step forward. We have all seized the white perimeter as our own and reached for a pen, if only to show we did not just laze in an armchair turning pages. We pressed a thought into the wayside, planted an impression along the verge. Even Irish monks in their cold scriptoria jotted along the borders of the Gospels, brief asides about the pains of copying, a bird singing near their window, or the sunlight that illuminated their page. Anonymous men catching a ride to the future on a vessel more lasting than themselves. Yet the one I think of most often, the one that dangles from me like a locket, was written in the copy of Catcher in the Rye I borrowed from the local library one slow, hot summer. I was just beginning high school then, reading books on a Davenport in my parents' living room, and I cannot tell you how vastly my loneliness was deepened, how poignant and amplified the world before me seemed, when I found on one page a few greasy-looking smears, and next to them, written in soft pencil by a beautiful girl I could tell, whom I would never meet. Pardon the egg salad stains, but I'm in love. I know, I love that poem by Billy Collins. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm horrible about marking up books. I teach college, and we have to use these e-books, you know, and I have to always order the book and mark it all up. So a little bit more about myself as a writer, I guess. People are always interested in that. So I said I started as an avid reader at the library primarily, and like a lot of writers, I was sick a lot when I was a kid, and you know, I was a child in the early 60s, and you know, we didn't have computer games and videos and Nickelodeon and the Disney Channel. So there wasn't anything to do. I just read, right? When I tell college kids that, they're like, they look at me like, you know, that must be Armageddon, right? Where, you know, no electronics. So my parents encouraged me. There was no limits on reading material. My father loved poetry. I still have my illustrated copy of Canterbury Tales. I bet you didn't even know that there was an illustrated copy of Canterbury Tales. We grew up in New England, and Robert Frost was read and spoken in our home all the time. And so I was really exposed to good poetry. And you know, the better read you are, the better you write. That's, you know, you want your kids or your grandchildren to be good writers, have them read well. So when I was in 9th grade, my father died, and I just started writing poems. You know, I never really thought about it, but it was a way to process what I was going through, and it kind of stayed with me, and was able to kind of continue to study poetry and write poetry. And then I moved here and was appointed poet laureate by Mark Sanford. We all remember him. So anyway, so it turns out, this is interesting, South Carolina has the longest history of having a poem read at the inauguration before any other state. South Carolina had that tradition. There you go. So I was asked to write a poem for his inauguration, and I wasn't even the poet laureate. That happened 6 months later. So since then, I've written a few poems for governors, and I've usually used metaphors from the natural world. It worked well. We all love the beauty of the state. But then, like, the winter of 2014, 2015 came along, and I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to write about people. And this was Governor Haley's second inauguration. So I really wanted to write about people. So I wrote this poem, and I'll end with this. It's called One River, One Boat. And you know, I come back to what I started talking about with libraries and community, and I think I wanted to write a poem that talked about our history and thinking about the state as one big community where we all have a place at the table. Does that make sense? Well, I'm going to read this poem and talk a little bit about it. I wasn't allowed to read it at the inauguration, but I'm going to read it here because I can. And then we'll finish up. And it begins with an epigraph by Elizabeth Alexander, who was the first inaugural poet for President Obama. I know there's something better down the road. One river, one boat. Because our history is a knot we try to unravel while others try to tighten it, we tire easily and fray the cords that bind us. The cord is a slow-moving river spiraling across the land in a succession of S's splintering near the sea. Picture us all crowded onto a boat at the last bend in the river. Watch children stepping off the school bus, parents late for work, grandparents fishing for favorite memories, teachers tapping their desks with red pens, firemen suiting up to save us, nurses making rounds, baristas grinding coffee beans, dock workers unloading apartment-sized containers of computers and toys from factories across the sea. Every morning, a different veteran stands at the base of the bridge holding a cardboard sign with misspelled words and an empty cup. In fields at daybreak, rows of migrant farm workers standing on ladders break opened iced peach blossoms, their breath rising and resting above the frozen fields like clouds. A John boat drifts down the river. Inside, a small boy lies on his back, hands laced behind his head. He watches stars fade from the sky and dreams. Consider the prophet John, calling us from the edge of the wilderness to name the harm that has been done, to make it plain, and enter the river and rise. It is not about asking for forgiveness. It is not about bowing our heads in shame, because it all begins and ends here, while workers unearthed trenches at Gadsden's Wharf where 100,000 Africans were imprisoned within brick walls, awaiting auction death, or worse, where the dead were thrown into the water and the river clogged with corpses has kept centuries of silence. It is time to gather at the edge of the sea and toss wreaths into this watery grave. And it is time to praise the judge who cleared George Stinney's name 70 years after the fact. We honor him and we pray. Here, where the Confederate flag flew beside the State House, haunted by our past, conflicted about our future, at the heart of it, we are at war with ourselves, huddled together on this boat, handed down to us, stuck at the last bend of a wide river, splintering near the sea. So I didn't think they'd not allow me to read that poem. I just thought they'd vet it and say, take the Confederate flag and meant business out, and we'd have an argument, and we'd figure it out. But I really wanted to write a poem that kind of addressed, not in a political way, but like, here we are, what are we going to do about it? We're all in this together, And it really was meant to unify and not divide. But now I just kind of read it whenever I get a chance. And I was really honored because Representative Clyburn read it into the congressional record. So in the end, because I wasn't allowed to read that poem, all kinds of people read that poem, right? I mean, how many people go to the inauguration? Not that many, right? I mean, that's how you get attention to a book, right? We all know that about banned books. If they say don't read the book, we all want to read the book, right? So I'm going to end with a more uplifting poem. I've written a lot of poems in a lot of different books, but this last book that I wrote, I'm going to hold it up. I don't know how many of you can see it. I did not do the art. Can you guys see it? It's really, this is the one that the artist got the Coretta Scott King Award, but this art is for my poem about Rumi. So this is a book that two of my friends and I got together. We wanted to make a book about poets that kids would never get exposed to when they're little, but then when they're older, maybe they were supposed to know who they were, and we wanted to kind of bring our favorite poets to them. So does anyone know who Rumi was? Yes. Okay, he was a Sufi mystic who wrote in the 13th century, but he was translated by Coleman Barks, a poet in Georgia, and his book is the most popular poet probably in the world. Brad Pitt has a Rumi quote on his arm. Beyonce and Jay-Z, their twins are named, who knows? Rumi and Sir, because Rumi is Beyonce's favorite poet. If you want to get, your kids are into Beyonce and Jay-Z, you just play that press conference that Jay-Z did about Rumi. That'll get them excited about poetry. So I was really thrilled that the art for this poem is the cover art. And I want to end with this poem because I think Rumi is all about celebrating everything around us, the world around us, and the arts. And I think that's what we're here to do today. So I'll end with this poem. It's called Spin a Song, celebrating Rumi. Walk out of your room beneath the morning sky. Let the sun enter your heart and find a way to keep it there. Make a song from the light falling through the air and dance even when you are alone. Dance if you are still sad. Dance when you're tired. Dance until your feet lift off the ground like wings. And later, when the stars are spinning in the night, put your ear to the ground and listen to the songs rising up from the earth. Everywhere you go, there is music. Thank you. Now, check out these scissors. There you go.
Oh. Thank you, Marjory Wentworth. Thank you. And I just, yes. All right. So I would be remiss if I didn't do a couple more thank yous. One is to the Berries for allowing us space for while we were under construction to store all our materials. They saved our lives. And also USC Union, who allowed us to live there. We think we're part of USC Union now for sure. So thank you to both of those. And at this time, if I could get our facility partners, staff members, board members, past and present, and elected officials up here so we can cut this ribbon and go inside where there's AC. Yep. You're welcome to stand in front or behind. Watch your step for the cord, please. Oh, thank you. It is only 11%. You ready? Lindsay, don't come. Miss Trudy's not either. Lindsay, come on. They don't have to. Where's Bill? Bill's right there. Bill, come over here. You gotta cut this. You're on the other. You're on the scissors with me. All right. Can everybody? All right.
You ready?
You ready, Bill?
Ready, set.
Are you guys gonna count us down? 3, 2.